just so we're clear on how we fit with VRA, VRO, and vRoutes, vCenter, DRS. I think we talked about this quite a bit. We get data from vCenter, and we send our actions back to vCenter. We get all the rules from DRS, and we also update the DRS rules as part of what we do. I didn't really talk about that, but we will augment its rules. So we're very, very complementary with those things. When a demand comes into vRealize, the flow, and there's a little bit of detail in here, it typically hits VRA. Via VRO, it comes to us, and it's through the get best environment workflow. There's a workflow, again, I can pull up if you want to see the details another time, of the workflow that comes into us, that calls our API to say, Cirba, where do I put this? I've got someone asking for these 5 VMs. It's exactly like what was on the left-hand side of that UI. It's just that it doesn't have the depth to figure out all the stuff that we do as far as how that routes into the environment. So we'll answer that and say, well, put it here on this environment. And as the latest version of VRA and VRO, or VRA specifically, allows us to pass back a host level placement as well, which is fantastic. So we can be very precise, saying here's exactly what you do with it, and then it will fulfill the provisioning workflow. So that's kind of the next level deeper. I could go deeper, but I don't really have time. But there are the detailed VRO flows of how that happens. They're quite interesting. But just think of it that that's good at provisioning, that's good at orchestration, and we're kind of that brain that answers the question of where to put it, where exactly to put it, based on all the stuff I talked about. And when you're running in this workflow, you don't need to see us at all. Like once we're tuned, there's no consoles, there's no see it. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. We're also working on integration with vRoutes, because people ask about this as well. And it's a great source of data. It has a lot of historical data unrolled up that we can tap into very quickly. And we provide a bunch of results that it doesn't have. So we're contributing those back into some extended dashboards, like demand management, demand pipeline dashboards, software optimization dashboards, volatility reduction. There's a whole bunch of areas we're focusing on. And we're working with them on that. So
that's dashboards within VRO?
Within vRoutes, yeah.
Okay, so your current people will have a current vRoutes environment with all their kind of dashboards in it. Yes, it may talk to EMC storage or NetApp storage or that kind of thing, but it can also pull all the advanced analytics that you've got, so people don't have to use 2 tools.
Exactly. And we're already doing that ahead of this being released, productized. We're actually doing a big integration with one of our customers right now just to pull it all in. So this, they don't actually even really need to see us at all. What we do is just under the cover.
Yeah, so you could be a fairly large portion of an environment, but VRA doing all the orchestration and automation, VRO doing all the analytics and showing you what it looks like, and you're in the middle, but no one necessarily needs to
Exactly. Yeah. We're like the Oracle database. It's there, it's lurking under there, and it's very powerful. Well, maybe that's a bad analogy, but the end user doesn't know doesn't know what's happening, but it's very powerful what's happening under the covers. This is the IBM Cloud Orchestrator workflow, and this kind of accentuates that exact point where when the user interacts with ICO, and then that hits our APIs, which hits our models. This is kind of slightly different style. We just fed off all that data I talked about under the covers, and they just get back an answer. It automatically gets back an answer that will cause the workflow. And again, there's a similar kind of graphical thing to the VRO workflow. We will also analyze proactively the VMs and generate resizing requests that go through it as a change management process. And when we do rebalancing, that goes straight back to the infrastructure, because it actually doesn't go, for technical reasons, it doesn't go through ICO in this integration. But the point here is that we're just, again, we're behind the scenes. We have our consoles, but those are for administering policy, looking at operational status, and if you want to do any forecasting. And again, you wouldn't even use our console, you can use our reporting database for that. So there's all the results of the analytics are all put in a database, a reporting system that you can just mine and get it out. So again, I showed those UIs, but picture it in practice. You're not looking at those UIs. It's just happening under the covers. That all make sense?
Yep.
I'm not going to try and go through all of these things, TOSCA template parsing and all that kind of stuff. And I'm definitely not going to go through this right now, other than to say that if you're interested, I can walk through. This is an actual workflow of where we fit in between the infrastructure and the cloud management tiers, what they call, in this case, Red Stack and Blue Stack, VMware and OpenStack, and Cloudify is in the picture as well. This is exactly how the API calls work in this customer. I'm not saying who it is, it's just details. So ordinarily, some people are quite interested in going through this and seeing what happens, but I'm not going to use the time. But just so you know it exists, if anybody wants to follow up, I'd be happy to walk through. We have these for all kinds of different scenarios with different products and mixes and how it plumbs into the infrastructure.
So are you leveraging your customer information that obviously doing this takes a lot of time and effort? Are they feeding that back up to you from some of your customers and allowing you to then use that with other customers as well, so you can speed up the process?
Well, I mean, really, there's only 3 API calls happening here, if that's what you're getting at. Like, we basically do an integration in where they call in at certain points, and then we work through the flow with them to say how it's going to work in their environment. I'm not sure if that's what you're getting at as far as the integration isn't actually that onerous. It's only a handful of calls, but we're set up doing what we do, and then, it basically just uses us as the decision point.
Are you just talking about this overall process of like they're going to give you a ridiculous amount of information that you're going to have to process? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, possibly that. Also, some of the interactions with VRA, there's still a lot that then needs to be programmed in VRA to actually do a whole lot of things. So it's great providing the information, but some of the intelligence of when to place things, or the information you're going to get from VRA, all that. I mean, just looking at that looks like a complicated workflow. How simple is it to get?
Yeah. So the way, again, I would twist this around and say it's taking something that's very complicated and making it quite simple, because just through a handful of calls to us, if you just black out everything below those white boxes, it just automatically happens. It basically is kind of giving that answer. The key thing about this diagram, which is quite interesting, is that it's just the thing. vRealize, VRA, and OpenStack aren't at all relevant in the early part of this flow. They don't have any predictive or upfront relevance in demand management. Only the day zero provisioning is where they kick in and turn things on. So all this upfront stuff, either this white line means that time can pass before that actually happens. This is what a lot of people don't realize about a lot of these products. Is they're not predictive, and they're not modeling that way. They just turn things on and orchestrate the workflow. So that's the key thing about this. But I wanted to balance here that this is what it takes to automate a cloud management process. I show this to analysts, and they say, wow, that really makes sense, because everybody talks about OpenStack and we're doing all this wonderful stuff with it, but really it takes more than just OpenStack to make a cloud. There's a lot more around it, and this kind of sheds a bit of light on that. But the way I view this is that it actually simplifies the whole process, because you've got someone to ask to make these complex decisions rather than doing it manually, which it would have been done. So that's kind of I'm just going to skip over these other ones. Yeah, there's an interesting Amazon versus bare metal analysis that if anybody wants to corner me over it later, I can talk about it. But the last thing I want to show, though, is just on the software licensing and just general densification. I wanted to make sure we talk about this. This kind of drives home a lot of what we're talking about. It's a very simple case, but a very powerful case. We've been working with a customer on kind of codifying how they want these decisions to be made. And this is the last 30 days for a VM and what it's doing. And I'm not going to say anything about who it is or when it is or whatever. But we're seeing here, this is by quartile, so we're seeing every day it kind of peaks up a little bit, and there's 3 or 4 days in this month where it went up higher, and it peaked up to about 80 or 90%, and there was some sustained activity. Now, if we look at the busiest day in there, that's what that day looked like. So it was doing virtually nothing, and around 10 a.m. it goes high for 4 hours, and then stops doing stuff for a while, and then goes high for like 6 hours, and then goes off. That's what that thing did on that day, and it did it 4 times in the last month. So when we look at this, we look at that pattern and look at back through time and say, yeah, we're seeing it's got sustained activity up around 85% when it's active. And so that's good. The way our policy was tuned was actually recommending we get another CPU, because we're saying if you're that high, you might benefit from getting another virtual CPU. There was another product in the environment. They had another way of doing it that was saying bump it down. And the reason why is because if you just, as I mentioned this earlier, if you just look at the 90th percentile, if I look at the last month of data, all the samples, and take 90% of them, it says it was 3.2% utilized. So again, that's the importance of all the stuff I'm talking about, the Tetris blocks and the math, is that I would not want to be around when you took a CPU away from that thing. It's going to cause it to go right off into past midnight in whatever it's doing. Like, I don't know what this workload was. It could have been something critical. So the importance of the fundamentals of just analyzing things right, just even at this level, just to reclaim capacity or bump things up is hugely important. There's all kinds of discrepancies where if you look at the actual patterns of activity, you do not want to proceed on that other plan. I'll just say it that way. So this kind of drives home just the net result of when you have our analytics, the advantage you'll get. From a density perspective, an example, this is kind of more of a marketing slide, it's a little more polished, but this is just one of our customers, I won't say who, but an example where by doing this, looking at those patterns and playing Tetris and everything I described, they plumbed it in, they got it running, I think got a pretty high level of automation on about 24,000 VMs and physicals. And in the first, this is really the part down here, In the first, I think it was 4 months, they saved $10 million and safely drove their density up drastically. It's a great case for this. And it's not overnight, but in the first few months, which is what it takes in an organization that size to kind of deploy things and get it all automated. Huge impact across the board. And again, that's directly attributable to the detailed analytics. Not oversimplifying the problem.
How long of a demo or a test trial run would you need to prove me that it works?
Well, I mean, usually when we go and try an environment, you can install it, get several weeks of data, and show the results that are indicative. They're not necessarily actionable because you don't have enough history to do it, but it's a pretty quick process to try it out and see that. So sometimes they run longer. Sometimes people will do a pilot where they'll actually run it in an environment and action things and then expand. But we have a pretty fine-tuned. If you want to try it out, it's pretty quick.
And I can do it myself, or I need you to set up a quick.
We like to get on the phone with you just for certain things, like we talk about like policy and stuff like that, just to make sure that it goes smoothly. But yeah, so you can. A lot of people just do it themselves. I can provide a lot of detail on that. It's a very well designed, defined process that we follow for that. So
just one thing on your customers. Some of your customers are enterprises that are using it for their own thing, but some are cloud providers that are doing it in a multi-tenant for their customers. Do their customers have visibility of this, or is this more for the cloud providers to manage their own infrastructure?
Well, so it's usually just for them, but we're working with them to kind of map out to the end customer. So we have more and more reports that you can start to map out. They're all different. They all have different interests, right? Some cloud providers like to right size, some don't.
Yeah.
We're working with one now that's saying, no, I want to tell them upside and downside to make it perfect because I want them to have the best service possible. Whereas other ones say, don't tell them the downside stuff. They're paying us for that stuff. So it varies widely, but we are starting to see someone want to map that value through to the end customer. Definitely the end customer, I mean, from a routing perspective, you want to get that thing in front of them so they can start using it to make decisions across all of their workloads, spanning that boundary. The last thing I'll show very quickly is software optimization. Symbolically, I've got Windows, I've got Linux, and they're all mixed up in an environment. Everywhere we see, they'll be randomized because nothing really cares that it's Windows or Linux when it's placing the workloads. We can take a subset of these and defrag them. So we have an add-on module that will go and take just a piece of software. It could be Windows, it could be WebSphere, WebLogic, Oracle, SQL Server, CA Wiley. We see all kinds of stuff. And it will take the expensive stuff and say, we can fit that on 4 of your 10 servers. Yes, we can fit all the workload on 8 of your 10. That subset can fit on 4, including one for HA. And so basically what we'll do is we'll shrink it, which requires that analysis. We program DRS to not change it, and we see just over half savings on average on Windows OS licenses. It's astronomical what the savings we see from this, and it's just an adjunct to what we've been talking about. And just to answer your question, here's an example where one of our customers went and did this, and very early on saved a lot of money in the first 3 months, and then about a year or two into it, on a major renewal, saved even more. So this is a massive savings.
I think the question for me though is yes, you can potentially move more VMs into a single cluster of a software licensing type, but the question then, should you, based around your failure domain, just because you could run, for example, 100 VMs on a single host with quad processor sockets, for example, and 1 terabyte of memory, should you? Right. And how do you take that into account in terms of a failure domain of that host going down?
So when we do this, we take into account all the other policy settings.
Okay.
So for example, we won't drive I/O above a certain level, N+1, room for growth.
Yep.
The answer is a complete answer.
Yeah.
As if you just isolated those workloads out and placed them optimally in their own environment, that's kind of what you're getting. Yep. Then the other stuff layers on. So a little bit of Linux can go in there as well, for example, but the Windows can't go outside the boundary.
Okay.
And we see some customers setting up, well, I have a Windows and Linux separate clusters already set up. We say, well, then even within those, you'll have SQL Server, you'll have WebLogic, there's all kinds of sub-containment going on. So it's like a Venn diagram of all the software and how you want to land in the environment. And this will kind of shrink it down and contain it in those boundaries. So
okay.
It's a result of everything I showed. It's all the routing and the control console placement, just with an extra constraint saying, well, you're doing everything else, minimize the footprint of this, please. And it just produces really wonderful savings just by rebalancing VMs. In one customer, we rebalanced about 6,000 VMs over 2 weekends, and it saved $2.3 million. It was that simple. So